Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Pack Breakers, a show dedicated to vaping and the people of vaping. Today we are shooting on location in Pretoria at Vapecon, a vaping convention that is hosted every single year. Today we have a very special show where we have international guests where we will be discussing policy and regulations, not only from a South African perspective, but maybe on a global perspective. So, welcome to the show, and let's get on with it. So we have two very, very important guests from overseas that I'm honoured to have at the Pack Breakers as our first real episode with people that we discuss these issues. On my left, we have Michael Landl from the World Vapers Alliance and Fred Roeder from Consumer Choice. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to Pack Breakers and to
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to just start off with maybe you can give us the organisation, where the organisation fits in this, and your role within those organisations. So, yeah, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you for having me as well. I'm Michael from the World Vapers Alliance. I'm the director. In short, we basically are a consumer organization fighting for our right to vape. We operate worldwide. Basically, wherever bad regulation is happening, we try to fight against it, try to organize the vaping community together, try to meet politicians, combat misinformation in public. And that is also one reason why we are in South Africa, because there is a very bad bill, which I'm pretty sure we will discuss, on the horizon. And we try to do that, as I said, worldwide. We have individual members at the moment, more than 100,000, and also 38 partner organizations which work with us on a national level. Thank you that you are one of our wonderful partners as well.
Yeah, and I founded an organization called the Consumer Choice Center. We're a global consumer group working on a variety of policy issues. Usually whenever you see innovation making consumers' lives better and some politician coming up with the idea that they really don't like the innovation and we should ban something, that's like when you put up the consumer choice sign, like the bad sign, and we then engage with the public, the media, policymakers, consumers to try to educate policymakers on how to create smart policies that actually benefit consumers. The original story is actually in 2014. I lived in Berlin, Germany, and there was Uber and other rideshares just entered the city, providing much better quality services than the taxis, cheaper. You could pay by credit card, which was basically impossible in a taxi in Berlin back then. And then the taxi lobby immediately said, we don't like that, and that should definitely be banned. And I was like one of the first or early customers using these apps getting a ride. And I was surprised that the traditional consumer groups didn't really speak up. Because I was like, hey, I'm a consumer and I'm getting hurt here by safer alternatives getting banned. And the traditional consumer groups tend to be like boomers that don't like technology, that don't like new things, that just want that everything stays like in the 1960s. And that was a bit like the birth hour of the Consumer Choice Center, where we basically represent consumers as a consumer group that like innovation and change. And harm reduction is one of the policy areas we really work on, because it's a global challenge that in nearly all countries in the world, policymakers don't like that smokers now have a better way to quit. And I'm an ex-smoker myself, so I'm very passionate about this. And it took vapes and pouches for me to actually be able to not smoke a cigarette. Even when I go out with friends, I have now like other ways of consuming nicotine without risking my health too much, which is great. And that's what we do. We are also a member of the World Vapers Alliance. We're one of the 38 organizational members, and really love working with consumers across the world and supporting them, fighting for better policies, because the facts are with us, on our side.
Well, thanks, Fred. I think you just touched on something very important there. Michael, were you a former smoker?
I was, and typical story, obviously, I started way too young smoking because I thought it's cool with probably 15. Smoked for 10 years, and I have to admit, I loved it. I never wanted to quit. I liked smoking. But then a friend of mine one day said, hey, have you heard about this new cigarette? And then he gave me a vape. And then I tried it. And within 2 weeks, I was a non-smoker. Can't stand a cigarette anymore. So I'm one of those accidental quitters. But I'm not looking back anymore. So it's no chance that I fall back. And that's also the reason why I personally fight so passionately for or against flavor bans and those kind of restrictions, because I know firsthand that it helps and it works as smoking cessation.
So, gents, I think it's safe to say that you have a very broad view of what's happening from an international perspective. In your view and your opinion, who do you think is currently getting it right? Now, I'm saying this with a slight bit of hesitation, because typically we would say the UK was the shining light. But recently we've seen some reversals and almost dangerous suggestions coming out. So again, in your view, who do you think is getting it right? And why do you think are they getting it right? Michael?
Obviously, it depends a little bit how we define getting it right. But if we look at the numbers and smoking rates, then clearly I would say there are two countries who are getting it right. That is Sweden and New Zealand, which are on the edge of becoming smoke-free with a smoke rate below 5%. So there it's pretty obvious that they do something right. And especially with the Swedish case, it's interesting that if we look at the overall nicotine consumption, it's on the same average as all other European countries. More or less, it's about 22% who consume nicotine in some way. But the interesting part with Sweden is that almost nobody smokes anymore. And then we can look into why that is. Obviously, they don't ban alternative and safer alternatives products right away, but quite the contrary, they embrace it. They even have one additional product with the traditional snus. So they have a variety of different products and they are also not fully encouraging it, but at least they are not fighting it. So a lot of people understand that there are safer alternatives, and that's why they switch. Recently, they also introduced lower taxes on snus so that people not only have the health incentive to switch, but also a price incentive. And I think if a country gets those two things right, then there is already a lot done right. And there is, people are not stupid. And I think then they understand that it's better to switch. And obviously, if you give as many alternatives as possible, then more smokers will find one product for them. I love vaping, but obviously vaping is not the only thing, and vaping doesn't work for everyone, and that's why we need those alternatives as well. And I think Sweden got that right by keeping those products on the market and not discouraging smokers to switch. We also don't see those moral panic like we see in a lot of other countries in Sweden. So it's a very science-based, neutral approach to those kind of issues. And I think that is already a big change to most of other countries where we kind of see this moral panic and fake news about vaping and other similar products.
It's a tough question who gets it right. I would have said the UK. The UK has been probably one of the countries that embraced harm reduction and tobacco harm reduction very early on. Unfortunately, in the recent 12 to 18 months, the former and now the new British government move away from this, which is surprising because the numbers in the UK are also very positive in terms of smoking reduction. Vapes are much more affordable than cigarettes in the UK, so it's also an economic reason for people to switch, which is a very, very good reason for people to see, okay, I'll try this out because it will actually cost less. And then it's even less harmful. Unfortunately, the UK now moves into the direction of banning disposable vapes, limiting flavors, limiting displaying products, advertising. It's still not really clear what exactly will happen because they got a new government, but it doesn't sound good. A vape tax, which didn't exist before that, and basically before this. I think the tax hasn't been approved yet, but it's probably in the making. But right now, you just basically pay the normal sales tax on vapes, which makes them much more affordable than cigarettes, which are very expensive in the UK. Maybe some really bad examples, if I may.
Well, yes. I mean, let's go on to that, because the next example is, what does bad look like?
So maybe like something in between. There are some positive examples of countries, for instance, Malaysia, which regulated vapes now after years of discussion, but it just gives consumers and retailers more certainty, because there's always a gray or black market, but then you don't really know what you buy, right? And that's also not good for consumers to gamble, basically. You have no idea what you're inhaling there. And Malaysia is one of the first Southeast Asian countries actually moved away from this more strict and prohibitionist approach, which is good. Not saying that they have the best rules, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And then Singapore is probably one of the really bad examples. And I think you get fined something like 30,000 rand if you enter Singapore with a vape and get caught. I mean, that's just but you can buy cigarettes in Singapore. Just no vapes, no chewing gum, obviously no pouches. I mean, but cigarettes you can buy. And that's just cynical public health policy. And Australia is one of these examples. I mean, sometimes you can just go like on the websites of the Singaporean, Australian customs offices, and they have these big reports how they, I don't know, caught 30,000 people with vapes and fined them. It's like, okay, is this actually a problem? Do you need to fine people for consuming nicotine in a less harmful way than smoking cigarettes? This is like a weird Twilight Zone parallel universe. And unfortunately, some countries follow this massive prohibitionist approach. Maybe later we can talk a bit also about low and middle income countries and how to approach harm reduction there.
I mean, that list cannot be complete without India and Mexico in it. I mean, India is well renowned for actual complete ban, even from a research point of view. And I now believe in Mexico, they're wanting to write the banning of vaping within their constitution, which is now being pushed through different houses in parliament. I mean, have you, Fred, ever seen an actual product or product category written into a constitution as being a law?
It seems that maybe some narcos want to diversify their business and want to sell vapes.
I think
you need to have a constitutional guarantee as a narco that you can really have exclusivity on that industry. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and you ask yourself, where is this coming from? In India, I believe the Indian government is like a main shareholder of their largest tobacco company.
I think they own 25% of Indian tobacco through the pension funds. And yes, it is rather cynical, but ironically, you can buy vaping products and safer nicotine products anywhere. Of course. So, I mean, and that's one of the experiences that I saw in Panama. Panama obviously being one of those countries that banned vaping, cigarettes everywhere. And interesting enough, you could buy a vape from a child in the street. And this was done during the conference, World Health Organization's Framework Convention Tobacco Control at the COP, I think it was the COP10 conference. You could buy a vape from a child in the streets. So, yes, Mark.
And there are two things which are interesting, I think, about this discussion, because recently I was on a panel with a German politician, and she explained to me that black markets don't exist. So she thought that's not an actual thing, because we always warn of black markets. When you ban something, the demand is not going away. So somebody else will supply the products, and normally it's the black market. And she didn't even think that is a real issue when it comes to vaping. Obviously, we saw it in Australia. They celebrated their 100th firebombing of tobacco stores now. So there is already the cartels taking over. And the second big thing for me personally always is that we warned of that for years, that when prohibition fails, at some point you need to criminalize consumers. Because otherwise, that's only the last step governments can do if nothing else works. And with those crazy fines in Singapore or in Thailand, in theory, you can go to prison for 5 years for vaping. Nobody so far did, but it's a law on the books already, and it's just a matter of time till some crazy politician or a crazy police officer says, there is actually this law, so let's apply it to consumers. And I think then we will end up with exactly the same situation which we saw with other drugs or cannabis, where a lot of countries are reversing their bans because of those things. And now we enter the same territory with vaping. So it doesn't make any sense to me. But apparently for politicians, they never learn from history or from evidence and facts.
Well, that's a good point, because it leads into the next question I want to ask, is that surely these policies and regulations are based on evidence and experiences. So what always interests me here, gents, is that we have certain parts of the world that understand it in a certain way and other parts of the world that don't. Surely, am I being just too, optimistic here or idealistic that we should always refer back to the evidence and the science around this? Why are these different regions seeing it differently? Why do you believe this is happening?
Yeah, you have some public outcry and then politicians got to do something. Right? I mean, look at the UK, where Public Health England actually says that vaping is at least 95% less harmful than smoking. So the public health authorities say that, but then you have politicians suddenly coming up with flavor restrictions and disposable bans because there's an article in the news about vaping being bad, and you have some suburban mom outcry and you need to do something. And this is probably unfortunately not just in the area of vaping or harm reduction the case, but in general in policies, politicians don't just stop. They don't say what, our regulation is great. We can call it a day. That's just not how this works, right? Unfortunately. And I mean, I think our job as activists is to educate consumers about the facts and then also to push this into media and to policymakers, because the facts are with us. And I mentioned earlier that I'm an ex-smoker, and I could not imagine that I would have been able to switch to vaping if I would only have tobacco-flavored vapes, because they're pretty disgusting in my view. Yeah, so just having different options for different consumers is something helpful, and this is something I also try to convey to policymakers when I talk to them, because if they're not consumers themselves, they just don't understand it, but then they should maybe be also a bit more humble before passing regulation to try to understand what the evidence is. And probably there are some cultural factors on some parts of the world being a bit more open to facts, and I think the Nordic countries tend to be there's a bit more debate, and things happen a bit more consensus. And then especially in the global south, you have a very prohibitionist approach, which is going to be really interesting now with the emergence of nicotine pouches, which are just much cheaper to produce than vapes. If you look at countries where a large part of the smoking population doesn't have much disposable income, and maybe access to vapes is just financially not possible, the burden to access harm reduction is too high. Nicotine pouches might be now a really, really great opportunity to have hundreds of millions of smokers to switch to pouches. And I think that's going to be really important in the next 5 years to explain this to policymakers in countries that have poor smokers.
But the sad thing about this, I'm already certain that we will see exactly the same debates about pouches than we see with vaping, because what you mentioned, this kind of mission creep, this won't stop. Because if we look at a lot of those anti-vaping groups, they started out as anti-smoking groups, and they were trying to get rid of smoking. Then a way safer alternative emerged, and suddenly all their approach morphed away from the actual harm from smoking towards fighting nicotine. It doesn't really make sense, but obviously it justifies their existence. If Sweden becomes smoke-free, all their anti-smoking groups are irrelevant. So they need to justify their own existence by saying, oh, but we still have some other nicotine products which we need to regulate or ban. And therefore, I'm pretty sure we will see the similar fights with nicotine pouches. Unfortunately, we will see how long it takes till we get the EVALI equivalent for pouches. But there will be some thing where a crazy person just meddles with a pouch and something happens, and then this will be the huge outcry. So I think we as consumers need to prepare for that. It won't be the easy, fluffy, here is the science, so please regulate accordingly. Unfortunately, politics doesn't work like this in most parts of the world.
You would think that a lot of these groups would take the win and support.
That's, I mean,
And
if
they
you look
haven't.
at the numbers in the US, you basically have a smoke-free generation now. When you look at
1.9%.
yeah,
1.9%
they
in high
should
school.
they
Yeah.
should celebrate this. Almost nobody smokes there anymore. But instead, this moral panic now morphs from smoking to vaping. But from a self-interested perspective of those organizations, it makes sense, because otherwise they need to say, we won, we quit now, we are done.
Because they pretty much, well, the way I view it, they pretty much built an entire industry, an entire ecosystem around anti-tobacco. And now that anti-tobacco is actually being, or the tobacco is on a Kodak moment, if you like, where it's dying, and it's dying rapidly, and in fact it's dying faster now that safer alternatives are out. It puts them in the Kodak category again. Almost they've been worked out by an outside party, an external party, into extinction. So obviously they're adapting to this.
And I mean, the anti-tobacco and anti-vape activists, they don't want to give innovation that victory. It's like now it's like, oh, but it's still industry and people still make money with nicotine. So it moved from actually public health arguments to like anti-capitalist arguments.
Yes.
It's like, okay.
Anti-choice.
Yes, and anti-choice. Yeah, it's just very paternalist, and they basically want to have full control over consumers and tell them what they're allowed to do, right? And it's. I mean, I think these NGOs and public health authorities show their true face now, because they're actually not interested in healthy outcomes. They're just in a dogmatic battle.
I mean, I don't have an explanation for that, but you can see sometimes when those activists complain, when vapers say, I quit smoking, but I enjoy vaping. And then they are like confused and they're like, but that's not good. It must be painful to stop smoking. I don't know what's going on in their brain, what their thinking is, that it has to be painful to quit smoking. Otherwise, it's not quitting. But that's how they are sometimes, which doesn't make sense. And you can see then that it's not about the actual health effects.
No fun killjoys.
Absolutely.
And I mean, we just go to a public health conference. You've been to these COP meetings. I mean, it's just, you can see that these people don't want to have fun.
Well, there are some people that go outside and have a smoke at these conferences, which, doesn't make any sense to me. You go to an anti-smoking conference and then you have a whole bunch of people standing outside smoking. Okay. Obviously, there's some interest in South Africa, the reason why you're here. And I'm sure you guys have gone through our bill, our Tobacco Products and Electronic Nicotine Delivery Systems Control Bill. Take a deep breath.
Thank you for you saying it.
We'll just call it the Tobacco Bill for short. And it's currently sitting before our Parliament in our Health Committee, and obviously there's been some stalls, some stagnation because of the recent elections and so forth. I just want to get a sense from you guys, if you've gone through the bill, and what do you think are real issues that you could see from this bill with regards to the experiences and insights that you've seen from around the world?
I mean, maybe I'm surprising you. I start with the positive. It doesn't say they want to fully ban vaping. So that's already a positive, I think. So South Africa is not going into the direction of India or Thailand or those kind of countries. So that's already a starting point. But for me, it's always the alarm bells are ringing as soon as you see something with flavor regulation, because that is, for most politicians who realize, okay, we can't ban it anymore because too many voters are using it, then their next best thing for them is always to ban flavors. And as soon as flavors are targeted, then that is for me a sign that is dangerous, because if there would be a full flavor ban, we all know that's a de facto prohibition, and at least the flavors are pushed to the black market then. And since the bill has exactly those kind of this thinking in it, it was clear for us, okay, we have to do something. Obviously, we have a great local partner organization here. And then on a general note, what I always try to tell consumers is, yes, that might be a South African bill, but that affects everyone else in the vaping community as well, because politicians look at other countries and look what they are doing. So it is affecting everyone, and that's why we try to fight here as well. We fight in the European Union, because that is always a vice versa, because one government then will say, oh, but they banned it, so we can ban it too, or we should ban it too. So I think it's very important and crucial that this bill gets, what is the word for it, binned? Or we can stop it to some extent. Obviously, as Fred mentioned, we are also not against regulation in general. We need sensible regulation. But that is a big difference and a very important difference. And for me, the second big part of the bill, which is mostly concerning for me, is this outdoor vape ban. I think it's not super clear what it should be, or restrictions on places where to vape. As soon as you have those kind of not very exact language in a bill, then it's open to interpretation, which is always dangerous for consumers, because then, as I said before, then you're very fast in a criminalization thing, or at least that you have to pay fines without knowing why exactly.
But our bill already covers some of those sanctions and bill fines, as well as jail time. But yes, the bill is very broad. If you think about the outside vaping and smoking, it literally says that you are not allowed to vape or smoke in an enclosed area. And if you look at the definition of enclosed, it literally says there, any single or more walls or roof, irrespective of whether it's temporary or permanent, and irrespective of the material it is made of, is considered as enclosed. So vaping or smoking under an umbrella is effectively illegal. But also, in terms of the flavor bans, there's a very important section, and I don't know the exact number of the section, but there's a section where it gives the health minister the permission to identify what components and compounds are in a product. And there's your flavor ban right there. And there is no, as you said, it's very vague. It just gives all the control to the health minister. So I think we're pretty much close to where we'll see the likes of Australia and the United States, or if we see with FDA, with only providing tobacco flavors and so forth.
Right, and I mean, if you look in the US, you see lots of people enjoying lots of different flavors. Vaping disposables as flavors that are not FDA, that didn't go through the FDA process, but it still exists because consumers want to have choice, and that's why you have like black markets existing. And I think this is like the big risk also of your bill, that if it's that comprehensive, a lot of consumption will just move to black markets, which maybe even some people in government have relatives that will benefit from this. But it's I think really important is to stress the fact that we need to have risk-based taxation. So if something is less harmful, less of these sin taxes should apply, because it doesn't. Otherwise, people just stick to cigarettes. And I mean, in general, it's concerning that governments think this is like the biggest issue they need to tackle. Probably there are lots of other public health and economic issues the government should focus on. If it's like the energy grid here, I keep hearing like I have some friends in South Africa, and sometimes it's a bit hard to schedule calls because it's like, oh no, we have load shedding right now. Can we do that tomorrow, please?
I think Michael's aware of that, yeah.
When you're calling from the dark.
Yeah, when I'm sitting in the dark.
I mean, maybe that's like a bigger issue to tackle than the.
No, we've got that sorted now.
Yes, then the health minister kind of rolling the dice on what flavor compounds are allowed and what not, which is also concerning, because the moment you put these very strict prescriptive rules into place, you cannot have innovation, right? I mean, this is something. If you look, for instance, at the European Union came up with this great idea to have a universal common charger. It's a specific USB now that every phone has to be charged with. But what if next year some great scientist comes out with a much better way of charging phones? It's already written in the law how the charger should look like, and that's how you drive. I mean, this is a bit like the official market in the US. You have only a few products that actually got through this PMTA of the Food and Drug Administration, and that basically vapes in the US probably for the next 20 years, if they don't change the rules, at least the legal vapes will look the same.
But don't you find it interesting that the FDA has only approved products that have been manufactured by big tobacco companies? And I'm not saying that this is because of tobacco conspiracy. I'm just saying is it because they pretty much have the funds and the capacity in order to meet those goals. Again, literally a boot on the face of innovation. Because there might be a small outfit out there that does have something that is really revolutionary, but they just do not have the capacity or the capital in order to do that. And the likes of the FDA, obviously, it's a very costly bar to cross. I mean, the type of reporting and research and evidence that needs to be presented goes into the millions of dollars.
Yes.
Not everybody has that.
And that's per liquid. Per liquid.
Not even per liquid. I think it's also per variant of the same liquid.
Yes.
So if it's a 2 milligram or if it's a 12 milligram, each one has to go through the same rigorous thing. And that's why I think the UK had such a fantastic approach, is that, they understood that vaping is less harmful. And the only thing you have to prove is certain chemicals are not found in that particular product and it doesn't exceed a certain nicotine level. You would think that that's logical for everybody and then manage the exceptions. But now what I believe a lot of the areas are doing is everything is an exception.
It's easier in the US to start a bank than bringing a vape to the market.
That's crazy.
If we think about it, if this system would have been in place, probably vaping wouldn't exist, because vaping is a consumer-driven innovation. Han Leek started it, but there were many more people who redefined their own devices and worked on it and brought it to market. So that's probably a prime example of a consumer-driven innovation where people just came up with a better solution than smoking. If this crazy FDA process would have been in place, none of this would ever be involved, and everyone would have stick with his own thing, but nobody would commercialize it or would be allowed to commercialize it, which doesn't make any sense to me.
And you see this now with pouches, right? I mean, in lots of countries, they're not really regulated yet, but they exist. And sometimes it's actually concerning because there's a lack of regulation. I think in a couple of European countries, in theory, minors could purchase pouches, and it's not illegal, which is maybe something. I mean, this will basically cause the next pouch EVALI, because it's actually regulators are sometimes actually negligent, and then they react to their negligence by making things too strict, right? And I think this is like something where we as now experienced activists should be like at the forefront to make sure the next wave of regulation when it comes, for instance, to pouches will be a bit smarter than a lot of the vape regulation that came in.
But Fred, you're just touching on something now. We all come from a consumer point of view. Our space has always been from a consumer area. We never get heard. We're the orphans on these discussions. We keep hearing about governments wanting to go a certain approach, but they actually never approach the people that are using the products. Why is this now a thing, a trend? Because it's not just in the vaping space, it's in a number of other areas. Why is there a trend to not listen to the actual people that are involved from a consumption point of view?
I mean, I would say in this specific area, consumers are seen as like stupid victims.
Addicts.
Like addicts.
Yeah.
And so there's, I mean, paternalist policies basically run under the assumption that we're too stupid to make choices for ourselves, right? And it's much smarter Minister of Health who knows everything, right? Which is also like, excuse me, I don't want to be treated like this. And I think it's like this, we know better for you approach, and that's why consumers are not being heard. But
there is a prime example. Just a couple of days ago, the Irish government published the results of their consultation on a vape bill as well. And they complained then that the wrong people participated, because it was 90% individual consumers and vapers who participated. I think overall it was more than 15,000 people. 90% of those 15,000 submissions were consumers. And then they said, those are industry shields, and there was a campaign for that because the results obviously were not the way the government wanted it. So basically they just neglected it. And in this whole report, there were 2 health organizations who submitted evidence, obviously in favor of flavor bans and those kind of things. So they always had their point of view 2 organizations. And then at the end, they mentioned, yeah, but a lot of consumers were against this, the 15,000 people. So it doesn't really make any sense. I've never seen that before, that a government complains that the wrong people participate in their own consultation.
I wonder if they have that view on tax. The wrong people are paying tax.
No, you can't. No, it's only not enough people who pay tax.
I always think it's the wrong person who pays it.
Yeah. But it is. I mean, it's becoming quite an issue, not only in our space, but we've seen in a lot of others, is that the people that are affected the most by these products or the lack of these products are the ones that are never given the opportunity to speak. And we've seen this firsthand at our public hearings, where, first of all, they never communicate or advertise the fact that these hearings are actually happening. And when we do get there and we stick up our hands, almost none of us get selected to voice our opinion. But it makes it even worse that once your opinion has been recorded or submitted, does it ever get read? Does it ever get consumed on that side and taken seriously? Like you've just said with Ireland, is that you immediately now again labelled and placed in a box that you don't know, they can't be right. They're just stupid. They're addicts. You should ignore them. And that's really quite a disturbing element in society at the moment, if you can just label and bracket somebody. I've always an opinion that we're trying to move away from that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's very anti-democratic. If you set up a democratic process and then don't accept the results, that's undemocratic for me. So,
but it goes against sorry, Michael, but it goes against the stream of all the other things that we accept. If you just look at the discussions around cannabis around the world, it goes against that stream. If we look at a whole host of these measures that are affecting individuals, why is this particular topic so different to others? And I think we all know this now. It's.
I would still say there's this anti-corporate sentiment that creeped into public health. And I mean, if you look at the WHO, for instance, their main job would be to focus on things like COVID. Where they told us wrong things, then, we just told you white lies. But they actually focus much more. You see like entire publications by the WHO talking about industry and industry influence and stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is actually not really your job. This is mission creep. And you see that in the cannabis debate. So we as a Consumer Choice Center also work on cannabis policy. And we saw that when Canada legalized cannabis, there was also this, we kind of need to keep the commercial element of it down, and maybe we have government stores that sell it, because they do not want that anyone profits from innovation, which then also kills the incentives. And of course, so in Canada, I think now 5 years after legalization, something like this, you still have 75% of the consumption on the black market. Because then in some provinces, you can only buy it Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. When someone who wants to have cannabis, when do you buy it? Probably more on a Saturday evening. And then it's not available, so you have someone on your WhatsApp you can write, and that person comes and brings it to you. And that's usually happens on the black market. And just people who make these rules cannot even think that far.
Yeah. And I think one more thing which is important about this prohibition thing is, what we tend to forget sometimes is that, yes, you have a very loud group of politicians and activists who try to ban everything, but you have a huge amount of politicians in the middle who just don't know anything about vaping, harm reduction, safer nicotine products. That's sometimes really surprising when I meet with politicians, how honest, or what honest questions they ask me. They're like, what is a vape? How does it look like? They know maybe a disposable. They see some smoke, or they think smoke is coming out of your mouth, and then they say, okay, that's the same as cigarettes. So I think that is also a big part of the problem, that misinformation, but also a lack of general information, especially among politicians, which is baffling to me, that then they still want to ban something. If I don't understand the product, why would be my immediate reaction, okay, let's ban it, before getting informed about it? So there is a lot of work to do, and I think that applies basically everywhere around the world.
But that's a symptom of exactly what we're talking about. Is that the symptom is that if we're not going to speak to the consumers, and we immediately don't trust the industry, then we're never going to know what these products are really about. Yeah. So they're making decisions purely on ignorance most of them are making this decision in ignorance, and then others are driven by pure ideology for having the pure life and not accepting that humans are, do come with faults, do come with choices, can make bad decisions. But surely you would imagine making decisions, or whether it be good or bad, should be based around the information that's provided. And I think there's a lot of big problems around not providing that information.
I mean, just on that also, like most medical doctors are misinformed.
Absolutely.
If you look at general practitioners, probably 2/3 of them think that vaping is as harmful as smoking. So as a patient, your doctor often tells you a wrong thing, and then politicians talk to a doctor maybe about this because they somehow think a practicing doctor knows everything. But I mean, these people are just practicing their profession. They are not. Most of them are not researchers.
I've got to be careful here, guys, because I'm married to a doctor. So, and yes, it does take a bit of education because once again, the information that was provided to them during their critical training phases was really a binary kind of discussion. Do not smoke. Nicotine is addictive. And then suddenly we got these massive leaps of logic that nicotine causes cancer, nicotine causes COPD and so forth. But then you ask the logical question, this very same nicotine that's available in cigarettes and vapes and nicotine pouches is found in nicotine replacement therapy. And that's an essential medicine. So do those cause COPD? Obviously not, because there's no combustion or inhalation. But do they cause cancers? Clearly they don't. So, and yes, it's about that information, but it's this feeding of incorrect or misinformation down the network and then feeding it. And now we have a population, many people around the world, that believe that vaping is as harmful, even more harmful than smoking. So I think it was Charles that once said that this is, almost murder. It's manslaughter, where you're providing the false information where a person could actually make the correct choice. It's a very sensitive subject, but the reality is that public health should be dealing with facts and providing unbiased information, which is not happening. So let's talk about South Africa. If you were given the opportunity to stand in front of Parliament or the Portfolio Committee of Health, what would you like them to do? What advice would you give them, given the sense that they are pretty new to this? Portfolio Committee of Health are pretty much new individuals in that committee. What would you like to, pearls of wisdom as to how would you'd like to see them approach this topic?
I would try to use their language by actually stressing that access and equity for smokers to harm reduction should be important, so that you don't have to be rich to switch or wealthy. And policies should be built around that, especially in a country with massive social disparities. It's important to think about how to get vulnerable parts of the population off cigarettes, and that's by embracing harm reduction and making it more affordable. That should be the policy. But then if they say no, you're like, okay, apparently you want that poor people keep smoking and die young. I mean, I would challenge them basically that way and try to have actually a conversation about humans and their lives.
And plus, I think the starting point of this discussion should be, what is our goal here? And the goal is here to reduce harm. And then the second question should be, how can we manage to do that? Is it by introducing flavor bans or restricting outdoor vaping, whatever? And I think if you're an open politician, you should do at least two things. Listen to consumers, who are the ones who are actually affected by policies, but also have experience with those products. Plus, look at science and actual practical examples. I think the science is clear. We don't really need to mention that. We mentioned practical examples with Sweden and New Zealand. So all we discuss here also works in the real world, and now we have proof for that. And politicians shouldn't be too proud of themselves. They should be able to look across borders and look to other countries, what does work, and then implement that here as well. as long as we all have the same goal, which I hope we all have, is reducing harm, and then just implement the practical steps, what you can copy from other countries. Maybe you need to tweak some things to make it apply to local circumstances. But overall, it's not rocket science. It is like, let's get as many people as possible away from smoking, because half of those people will die due to smoking. If you don't want that, then you have another agenda and other issues or ideology behind that, but then please admit it.
I would add something to that, and it was based on an Australian politician, funny enough, that said something sensible that it does happen. And he basically asked them, what does success look like? But more importantly, what does failure look like? And I would add something to that. Are you prepared to take the credit for the success? And are you prepared to take accountability for the failure? And that's the question I'd like politicians to answer, is what does success look like and what does failure look like?
And did you ever ask them here?
I'm planning to. And I think it's an important question, and it applies to any policy out there, is what does it look like if it's achieved? Or if it isn't achieved. Gents, I'd like to thank you very much for spending some time with us. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you here. Is there anywhere where our viewers can follow you on the socials, on the internet?
Twitter, Consumer Choice C as in center.
For us, it's worldvapersalliance.com, and me personally on Twitter at Landl Michael.
Thank you very much, gents. I hope you enjoy your stay in South Africa, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having us.
As the Pack Breakers is about discussions and talking to individuals, I invite anybody and everybody that has an opinion on tobacco harm reduction to come onto the show, have a discussion with us. Whether you're for or against harm reduction, whether you're for or against vaping, or any of the other products, if you have any issues or in support of, let's have these conversations. And I think this is a great place to have them. If you have any questions around what we should be discussing or wanting to see anything in specific around harm reduction or particular guest you'd like to see, please jot it down in the comments of this particular podcast or in any future podcast that we'll be issuing out once a month. And also calling out those people, former smokers and now vapers, to come online with me and let's have those discussions around what your experiences were as a person that smoked. Share those experiences as a person that used to smoke and that switched over to vaping or any other harm reduction product, and share with the world as to why it was important and what your life has been like since you have switched over. For those individuals, please send me an email to info@vsml.co.za and let's set up some time so we can have these discussions. So the intention of Pack Breakers is to have a show at least once a month, and this will be hosted on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and maybe even Rumble. So we hope to see you, join the conversation and interact with these particular platforms. And thank you very much.